Once you understand the terminology of the ARM architecture and the product line of the ARM processor, another important topic we need to understand is the ecosystem of the ARM company. There are three important players in the ARM ecosystem. The first, the player is ARM companies and the solution companies and the open source community. That is the first player in the ARM ecosystem. And another important player is the chipset vendor. And the third one is the OEM and companies. Those three, the individual, the players are important to shape off the ecosystem of the ARM companies. Now, so let's look at the first player. The first player is the ARM companies. And ARM companies release the specification that is used to design their intellectual property. Intellectual property means the IP, that is the basic unit of the chipset. Important point is ARM companies does not manufacture their own chipset. Instead, the chipset vendor actually go to the foundry to manufacture their own chipset. And another important thing is the ARM companies is actively participated in open source community. In the Linux kernel open source community and U-boot open source community, you can see that some ARM software developers are upstreaming their code into Linux kernel or the U-boot. The mission of their upstreaming their code into open source community is to make their ARM processor to be run in the various software stack. So another key players in the ARM's ecosystem is the chipset vendor. Let's move on to the second player. Once the ARM company released their specification, based on this specification, the chipset vendor manufacture their own chipset based on ARM's IP. The example of the chipset vendor include Qualcomm, NVIDIA, NXP, and Infineon. Then their main job is to implement their own IP. Sometimes this IP comes from specification of the ARM companies, and sometimes they can implement their own IP. And in order to execute, run their own chipset IP, they have to implement their own device driver to control the intellectual property, that's IP. To make it happen, they implement the device driver on the top of Linux kernel. Also, the chipset vendor implement the bootloader that include first programmable bootloader and the second programmable bootloader. Then they developed the SDK toolkit to provide the environment where software developer can implement their own application. And those software stack and debugging tool and phrase tool can be integrated into the Git repository. That is called BSP. BSP stands for Board Support Package. Using BSP, the chipset can be executable in the stable condition. Right after chipset vendor realized that their chipset is working fine to meet the requirement of the stability and performance, their BSP will be delivered to their customer. Their customer is the OEM, the company. The third important player of the ARM ecosystem is the customer, the OEM companies. The OEM vendors include the number of the companies like Samsung companies and then Sony corporation. What they're doing is to actually manufacture the end product. The OEM companies is collaborating with the chipset vendor very often. If they have some of the issues in the chipset that come from the chipset vendor, they can open, what I mean is OEM vendor can open the take caring service. Using the take caring service, the OEM vendor can get the technical support from the chipset vendor. And the job of the BSP, the embedded developer in the OEM vendor, is to integrate the various peripheral onto their own the device, their platform, to make their end product. Example of the end product include smartphone, the digital television, and the various hardware unit in automotive sector. In summary, the Arm's ecosystem consists of three important key players. The first one is Arm companies. The next one is the partner company for the Arm companies, that is the chipset vendor. And the third important player is the OEM vendor. Especially Arm companies is collaborating with the chipset vendor because chipset vendor is the actual real customer for the Arm companies. They are exchanging their idea through the various communication channel. Sometimes the documentation can be shared and they have the sort of the technical meaning very often to corroborate each other. So now that you get to know about the ecosystem of Arm companies, the next lecture we will explore the product line of the Arm architecture and Arm processor.